my name is Yaser, and I manage. I'm the general principal of the Waldorf School of Jordan. Why I chose to bring, or I decided to try to bring Waldorf education to Jordan is kind of a long story. My family moved to Jordan from the U.S. when I was 10, so I started 5th grade here, and the Jordanian educational ecosystem is really influenced by very traditional, old school, mindsets and models. Mostly the British model on the one hand, and then Ottoman schools and Quranic schools and Islamic schools. These are the different strands that make up the ecosystem here. And recently you've had obviously the importation of things like IB and other kind of systems. But the result is that when I came in 5th grade, I came in as I was a Montessori kid. I was in alternative schools in the U.S. and with a measure of freedom and exploration. And I was kicked out of about 5 of the top schools in Jordan. It was a real disaster. And it was just a cultural disconnect. And the way my mind worked was not. So I swore I would never return to Jordan. I finished high school here. I went to the States. I studied philosophy and linguistics, and eventually did my master's degree in education. And the plan was, I then decided I'd do a PhD in English. And my plan was, I'll be a professor in the US, I'll stay there, and why would I come back to Jordan? And then I grew up a little bit, and I kind of started feeling that the schools that were available in the West, I was in California at the time, I would have done great in these schools. If I had been at a Waldorf school, I became familiar with Waldorf education and started getting really involved in learning about it and exploring it. And I really felt a real sense of jealousy at first, that if I had been in one of these schools, I wouldn't have had these problems, I would have had a great school experience, and that I would have really thrived. And then it occurred to me that there must be other students in Jordan, and obviously elsewhere, that there must be so many people who are similar to me, that they're just not served by the available schools. And that, in Jordan, friends of mine would be getting married and start to have the conversation about where would you put your kids in which school. And they would ask me because they knew I was interested in education. And it occurred to me there's not a single model that I would want for my children. And so that's when I kind of changed my thinking, and I thought, no, that I have an opportunity because my family was in a position to support the project, and I was in a position to really come back and commit myself to it, that I had a kind of obligation to try to do it. And that the potential positive impact a project like that could have was much more than anything that I could achieve writing papers about Shakespeare or Milton or typography, which was my specialty. So then I moved back to Jordan and started trying to figure out how to do it. And it took several years to figure out the right business structure, the right legal structure. How far along should we start? What kind of staffing? And it moved slowly at first, and then it moved really quickly. And it turns out that we have 400 students now, over 400. We expect to have about 500 a year. So it turns out, I think, that there's a real thirst for something different, some kind of alternative approach, mindset, culture for students and for parents. And that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of kids that are just not being served by the available models. There's so many layers of challenges, whether it's bringing Waldorf education or elsewhere. You have legal issues, obviously, and that's the first layer. You can't fight, the expression is, you can't fight City Hall, right? So you have whatever your regulations, your ministries, and so on. So you need to think about how you can, instead of just getting really attached to the literal details of, for example, Waldorf schools, but think about the spirit of it. So, Waldorf schools, we don't use textbooks, and here the ministry requires us to use textbooks. So, instead of trying to fight that or giving up, so say, okay, well, what's the point of not using textbooks? The purpose is to encourage a sort of organic learning, to have the kids learn by experience rather than through the book, and so that you can re-engineer the way you use the textbooks to capture the same purpose or to approximate it. So you can use the textbook as a kind of way to review something that they first experienced via let's say, an experiment, if it's a science book or an activity. And then just find that balance and so on. But then the second layer is cultural, right? So you're going to face these unofficial hurdles. One example here was with knitting and crochet and handwork in general are really essential to Waldorf education. And we unexpectedly, usually we do knitting in first grade. Most Waldorf schools will do knitting and sewing in first grade and crochet in second grade, and then they'll alternate after that. Well, the issue that we faced right away is that the boys in the class were completely refusing to participate. The girls were quite happy to. The boys completely rejected the idea, and then within a few days we even got feedback from the parents that how can you ask our sons to do this? This is a woman's job. This is feminine. This is demeaning, and so on and so forth. And at first we didn't know what to do, but I decided, no, it's really important, but we have to represent it as not a class just for the students. So I went and I said, who's the most manly person in the school? And it's our PE coach. And I said, okay, so coach, do you know how to knit? And he said, of course not. I don't know how to knit. And so I said, well, guess what? We're gonna lower your teaching load, and we're gonna take knitting with the first graders. And crochet with the second graders, and we did. So the next classes we were there on the carpets with them, learning to hold needles and being scolded by the handwork teachers, and so that immediately broke the ice with the boys. There was a period of awkwardness where they're looking at us and they're thinking like, why are these? But then the parents also loosened up because they realized that it wasn't about teaching the kids to become master sewers or master knitters. It was about teaching them the values of patience and thinking in patterns and practice and perseverance, which is, these are real things that knitting or sewing teach people. And so, and the coach did beautifully, became a very good knitter. I didn't, but we kind of broke that barrier here at the school, and then we went from there. So there's that kind of stuff. And then finally, there's the stuff about capacity. Like if you're building, like for us, bringing Waldorf education here, we don't have a pool of Waldorf trained, certified, experienced teachers here in Jordan. So you're faced with a choice right off the bat. Do you want to import your teachers and bring them all from abroad? Do you want to say, well, we can't do this until we get everyone certified, which means we need, hundreds of thousands of dollars and several years? Or do you want to say, no, we're going to commit to using local people and slowly building that capacity? By bringing in some trainers, on a case-by-case basis. Maybe some people will visit Waldorf training centers, will provide the training in-house, and that it'll be a process. So the main thing, I guess, is patience, which is a big Waldorf value. That, it's not going to be, if you're bringing in, if you're the first person to bring in a Reggio Emilia school to a context that's never seen it, it's not going to look like or be completely like a Reggio Emilia school in Milan. It's going to take you a lot of time to get there, and then you're going to discover some parts of it will just have to change for you. But even if they don't, you need, and that's a value we want to teach students, right? That you don't learn things in one day. That when you face frustrations, you adapt, you struggle, you just take a deep breath. So that's the main thing: patience. If you're interested in coding and in teaching kids coding, now people are doing it in preschool. There are many ways to do it, but one way would be to buy them iPads and get them with whatever one of these pedagogical software programs. The other way is to step back and ask yourself, what is coding? Coding is working with logic and algorithmic thinking and with patterns that are minor elements that through structured repetitions can create meaning, and through commands, right? So we think that we teach that. Waldorf schools in general think that we teach that quite well and effectively through things like, for example, knitting or following sewing patterns. I mean, knitting is a binary code, for example. It's a purl or a knit, and you have a finite number of possibilities. You have a certain length of yarn, so you learn to work with that to create patterns that, when multiplied and repeated tens of thousands in computers, millions of times, create beautiful, meaningful, functional things. So that kind of thinking, we think, the technological thinking, we build into so much of what we do. So in other words, we are teaching them technology, we're just doing it using core tools, right, rather than technological tools. The people that program today's software didn't have this software growing up, and that's the basic idea. The people that created the people that created the contemporary digital revolution simply grew up without it. So if you learn them to engage with math, engage with logic, engage with design and problem solving, then you will be teaching them technology. But the other component is the obvious thing, that number one is the research is still out on the health and academic effects of screen time, of some of the software, and a lot of the research is pointing in the opposite direction, that kids who write things by hand remember them better, they form neural connections as opposed to typing, that that blue light messes with our attentional capacities, that screens they're associated with higher levels of ADHD, all kinds of things. So I'm not saying that we have the conclusions yet, this stuff is still too young, but it seems like an awfully big risk to take on something that's only been around for, in the pedagogical universe, about 10 years, so that if you take the risk and 20 years later, you discover that, oh, this is really harmful or this isn't effective, you've lost 2 generations of instruction. So that I think we should all be slowing down on that. And then finally, there's a real question of content and influence. So part of our purpose is to surround kids by inspiring and beautiful and engaging things. And they leave the school, they're surrounded by screens and pop culture and social media and all the content that comes with that. And the idea is that to provide one space in their lives, not their entire life, that's kind of free from that, so that they can develop all the other capacities. And that's the way I view it, that they, I'm sure that working with digital technologies and the internet and social media develops all kinds of capacities that are positive. But surely there are other capacities that are developed by another environment. And so our kids, almost all that have both. They go home and they have access to all that stuff. I don't have the answer to that. I think everyone is looking for the answer to that. But my gut feeling, and based on my readings, my experience, is in many ways you don't have to do much. It's more about what you don't do. That I think if you watch young children as they develop critical thinking, curiosity, creativity, unorthodoxy, rebelliousness, these things are pretty natural to children. Sometimes these things bother adults. And so most models of education, it seems to me, the problem is they do too much to try to get those things trained out of the kids. And instead of kind of stepping, in the first place, getting out of the way, stepping back, letting kids be kids. And that's central to Waldorf education. Don't begin the process of education in the academic sense until much later. Let them kind of grow into their bodies and grow into their souls and their minds before you begin trying to teach them multiplication or something, relatively insignificant like that. It's much more significant to be comfortable in your body than it is to know 2 times 2. And so you need to give the child time to, and I think if you do that, and then so that's one part of it, is let them kind of naturally keep these capacities. And the other is to create a setting and an environment that inspires them, and sometimes in passive ways. So if you just surround them by interesting things and interesting people, and whether that's nature, or kind of inspiring teachers, or as much as possible beautiful art and materials and a natural environment, that inspiration will do a lot of the work for you. And in terms of creativity, I think the last thing I would say is you have to let them experience the world. And schools more and more are becoming not about experiencing the world, they're about experiencing, facts or propositions about the world. So, we go to the science lab in order to talk about the solubility of salt. I mean, the other way to do that is to go to the kitchen and, dissolve some salt. So we go to great pains to design curricula in early childhood for sensory, skills and stimulation. Well, so we have types of Play-Doh exercises, and it's really kind of contrived and false. The other way to do that, just let them bake bread. That's a sensory activity. And these things are much more inspiring because then they go out into the world and they see them in the world. You know, they connect that with their own experience, and so the skills that they're learning have meaning for them. And I think that's somehow, I don't know exactly how, but somehow at the root of creativity. Because when you think about a problem that has meaning to you, then you're in, you're encouraged, you're motivated to think about it creatively. You're primed to. Whereas when you think about a problem that doesn't mean anything to you, like Sam went to the store, he bought 3 apples and 4 pears. How much money does Sam have? I mean, that's not a real. Let them go to the store. Instead of reading a word problem in a math textbook. So I think that must be at the root of it somehow. Create a culture and a habit, more importantly among the teachers and among the admin, where we just constantly give each other feedback. So part of that is, for example, we have the teachers, we lower their teaching load compared to other teachers here, and we ask them to do 2 things. It's required. So one is to attend a class of their choosing with their students as a student. So if she's, let's say, we're talking about a homeroom teacher, she might choose to be a music student with her kids. So she goes to the music class, and in that classroom, she's not a teacher, she has no authority, she has to follow the rules and the procedures, or a PE class, or an art class, or if she's an art teacher, she might attend a social studies class. So that creates an opportunity for her to give feedback as a student, not as a colleague, to the teacher, to say, I didn't understand this, or I'm really struggling with this, or I feel like maybe it would be better if we were in groups, or something like that. And to experience what it's like to be a student as well, right? So that she remembers that the frustrations, the confusions, the process, just the whole thing that we tend to forget because it's been a while since we've been that age. The other thing is that we ask each teacher to observe every other teacher, not every other teacher, but to observe another teacher of her choice. Sometimes we'll make a suggestion, usually once a week. So to arrange with, to just attend, observe, we have a kind of a rubric that we give them for just to help frame the way that they watch the class and what they're looking for. And then we facilitate a chat. And so sometimes, depending on the personalities, I might be there to have a chat, or eventually they'll be there, having a chat on their own. But this is what I saw. I noticed you did such and such, or I noticed that you forgot to remind them about the end of class procedures, or I really felt that this part could have been clearer, or maybe there wasn't enough planning. But then reciprocally, the other teacher gets to observe her colleague. So it's disarming because everyone is exposed. It's not, usually the model is the principal or the coordinator goes, observes, gives feedback. And that's a problem because it's always top down. Right, so that means that the teacher is not likely to be as willing to accept criticism or negative feedback. And then hopefully, by having those things happen every week, people get in the habit of learning how to give feedback in a useful way, how to observe in a useful way, and how to accept feedback. And then that creates kind of a culture where feedback happens in more informal ways. Because sometimes feedback might be a 30-second comment. That's a very useful feedback. It doesn't have to be like a formal session where you sit down. And I find that the best feedback is like that. So the goal is to create the whole culture where everyone's always commenting about everyone else's practices, but with an eye to learning and improving to them. So that's the idea. And Waldorf education has been called authoritarian by other alternative. In terms of curriculum design, in terms of even some details of the classroom teacher really controlling the rhythm of the day for the student. But we think on some level, we're guiding them through a process that we've already been through, that we've studied, and that we can give them the benefit of that. So, but I mean, when that authoritarianism veers off into authoritarianism, I think really goes back to the mindset and the personality of the educator, of the teacher in the room, in that particular room. Rudolf Steiner said that he was talking to a group of teachers, and he said, you will never be good teachers because of what you do. You will only become good teachers because of who you are. And we really believe in that After you give all the training and preparation and guidance and curricula, what you need is a person in the room who is a good, inspiring, caring, loving, and understanding, and democratic and fair person.